Hello, it's Tessa. Welcome to the second video in my color mixing series. In my last video, I walked through my process for narrowing down a larger range of colors into a split primary set. Today's exercise is to use this color set to mix our secondary colors. Before jumping into painting, I want to chat a bit about color saturation. This refers to how bright or dull a color is. The brighter a color is, and the closer it is to the outside of a color wheel, the more saturated it is. The duller and grayer a color is, and the closer to the center of a color wheel, the more desaturated it is. When we're mixing colors together, it's helpful to envision where they fall on the color wheel. Red, yellow, and blue are equally spaced along this color wheel, and between each one is a secondary color. If we draw a straight line between the primaries we're mixing, our mixture will fall somewhere along that line. Two primaries leaning towards the secondary color we're mixing will result in a more saturated mix, closer to the outside of this color wheel. Two primaries leaning towards the other secondaries will meet more in the middle, giving us a more desaturated mix. For our secondary mixing exercise, let's make a saturated and a desaturated version of each secondary: green, purple, and orange. First, I'm going to take the swatches I made in the last video. I'm going to write the name of the secondary color that each one of these primaries leans towards. My lemon yellow leans more towards green, gamboge leans more orange. Cadmium red is an orange-leaning red, and permanent rose is closer to violet. Ultramarine blue is closer to violet as well. This paint is called intense blue, but I see on its pigment label that it is a phthalo blue, which leans more towards green. Draw out a 2x3 chart on a small piece of paper. Each section can be the size of a trading card or smaller. In my 3 columns, I'm labeling the secondary colors purple, green, and orange. Then I label each row to be saturated and desaturated. I'm starting with purple, since it tends to trip up the most people. Since we have heard from such a young age that red and blue makes purple, it can be disappointing when the bright red and bright blue on our palettes make a murky brown. Many times this brown is what I'm aiming for, but to mix something bright and saturated, we need to pay attention to each primary's lean. Look at your swatches for your reds and blues. Each one should have a color labeled with violet. These are the 2 colors that will mix the most saturated purple. On a mixing palette, bring over some of your violet blue and violet red, mixing them together. I like to test them on a scratch sheet of paper first, to decide whether I want to add more of either color. This mixture gets so dark in the palette that it's hard to see any hue. By painting it out with a little extra water, you can more easily see the color you mixed. When you're happy with the mix, paint it into your saturated purple section. I'm aiming for a bright, royal purple for this box. Now it's time to mix a desaturated purple. Instead of using the red and blue that have a violet lean, we're going to pick the other 2 to mix this one. Since these colors are leaning towards a different secondary color, they will create a more desaturated mix. Starting with our saturated green, I'm going to find yellow and blue swatches labeled green. It's a good idea to start by bringing over your yellow paint and slowly adding blue to it. If you start with a puddle of blue paint, you may be stuck mixing a lot of yellow in to get the right color and end up mixing way more paint than you intended. Now we can move on to our more desaturated green. I've found that people have the opposite problem with greens than they do with purples. Oftentimes, when we're mixing greens, it's to paint a landscape or some greenery. What comes out is an acidic green that is much too bright to look natural. This problem comes from mixing a highly saturated color from our green-leaning primaries, instead of a more muted, natural green. For this one, grab your orange-leaning yellow and your violet-leaning blue. The green I'm getting is much more natural, but still very clearly green. For the saturated orange, choose your orange-leaning yellow and red. For the desaturated orange, use your greenish yellow and violet red. Unless you're using a very violet-leaning red and a very greenish yellow, don't be surprised if this orange still feels kind of bright. In my split primary palette, even these opposite-leaning red and yellow paints seem closer together than all the others. Now that you have all 6 sections filled out, take a moment to label them with the colors you used. By the time we've finished all our color mixing exercises, it will be hard to remember what each color selection was. Sometimes you'll be surprised and delighted by a color mix you achieved, and you'll want to remember it for future paintings. Do yourself a favor and take good notes. Now that we've gotten some practice in mixing secondary colors, our next exercise will be learning to mix complementary colors. Keep an eye out for my next video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.